I've just come back from doing the Tour du Mont Blanc for the 4th time, where I was updating my guidebook. And if you're planning on doing the walk, I'm going to do a little guide, a video guide for you just now, so you know what you're letting yourself in for. It's a pretty tough hike, so you need to be reasonably fit. Almost every day you're ascending about 1,000 meters and walking about 12 miles each day. So I'll go through each stage. It's a circular hike, and you'll start in Les Houches, which is in the Chamonix Valley. Now this first section is a bit of a baptism of fire. You have to ascend quite steeply for 600 meters to Col de Vosa. Now you can cheat. You can get a cable car from Bellevue up to Col de Vosa. But if you want to complete the entire circuit and have the satisfaction of saying you've done the entire thing, then you'll have to just gird your loins and climb those 600 meters. And once you get up there, you have a choice. You can either take the easy route, which is mostly downhill, to Les Contamines, and that way it goes through a series of little villages and along the valley to Les Contamines. But the more interesting way is to go over the Col de Tricot to Refuge de Miage, and that way is quite hard because you have to go even higher. You have to ascend more, but you go past the Glacier de Bionnassay, which is really beautiful, and then ascend up to the Col de Tricot. Now going down the other side is very steep, down to Refuge de Miage. It's a bit of a knee jerker, but you get a fantastic view of the mountains from up there. So once you're at Refuge de Miage, there's another steep climb. It's not too long though, up to Refuge de Truc. Obviously you can stay at these two places, but it's a good idea to push on to Les Contamines to make a bit of progress. And from Refuge de Truc it's pretty much downhill all the way through shady woodland, so that's quite nice because it's often quite hot and sunny here. When I did it in June it was above 30 degrees, it was really hot. So drink lots of water. So stage 2 begins quite gently. You're just walking along the valley, but you're heading for the Refuge de Bonhomme, and that is quite high up. It's, let me check, 2,329 meters. So it's quite high up. So again, you've got a lot of ascent to do there. But the first half of this section is quite gentle through the valley. And then it starts to rise after Notre Dame de la Gorge, the church there. And you follow this old Roman road. You can still see the old paving slabs there, which is quite nice. And you'll go past two refuges, the Chalet La Balme and Chalet Namporant. There's a couple of bivouac sites along this section as well at La Rolla and at Chalet La Balme. So you can camp there. But if you're pushing on to Refuge de Bonhomme, you need to get ready for the steep ascents. You head up into the high mountains here, into this cirque. The path gets a lot rougher, so it's much slower going up here. Eventually you get to Col de Bonhomme. You might see ibex around there. They were reintroduced to this area some years ago, and they're quite common. You see them quite regularly. And from that col, there's a little bit of a awkward path to the next col, Col de la Croix de Bonhomme. And that stage often has a lot of snow on it in the early summer. If you're going in June, there's likely to be snow at these altitudes, but it's not too difficult to cross. Lots of other people have crossed it before, so there's a good trail through the snow. So you can stay at Refuge de Bonhomme, or if you prefer, you can descend down to Les Chapieux, where there's a couple of refuges there and a restaurant, so that's quite a nice spot. And there's a free campsite there as well, although they do ask for donations, which is fair enough. The problem with going to Les Chapieux is you then have a pretty boring walk the next day up the road to La Ville des Glaciers. So there is an alternative which goes even higher over the mountain. So from Col de la Croix de Bonhomme, you can ascend to Col de Four at 2,665 meters. Now when I did it in June, there was a lot of snow up there. Again, it wasn't dangerous or difficult, but it was quite slow going, kind of slows you down. But it's a beautiful route, and it avoids the road walk from Les Chapieux. So I only recommend doing that if the weather's good though, because you're very high up there. If the weather comes in and there's thunderstorms, as there often is in the summer, in the afternoon, that's not a good place to be. So in that instance, you would want to go down to Les Chapieux. But if you go over Col des Forts, you end up at La Ville des Glaciers, down in the valley, and from there the next place to stay is Refuge des Montets, which is just up at the head of the valley. And then the next day is another big ascent over the Col de la Seine, and you are going into Italy once you get over the col, and that's a spectacular spot. You get a fantastic view down into Italy. You can see Mont Blanc to the left and the Grand Jurasse in the distance. It's a really magnificent spot to linger for a while. And then the descent from there is quite straightforward. Just goes down into this valley to Rifugio Elisabetta, which is another good place to stay, which is in a really beautiful spot just below the glacier there. From Refugio Elisabetta, there's a zigzaggy track which eases you down onto the valley floor, and then it's a straightforward walk down the valley. When I went along there in June, there was still remains of avalanche debris down in the valley, so I had to climb over that. Eventually you get to Lac Combal, and there is another refuge on the other side of the lake there, Cabane de Combal. It's just below the kind of moraine wall of the Glacier de Miage. If you have time, it's worth wandering up there. Go up to the refuge, and there's a path that takes you up onto the moraine, and you can look over the glacier there. It's a really beautiful place, worth a little detour. But continuing on, you have to start another big ascent from Lac Combal, and this takes you up to a high point of 2,420 meters. And it's worth the effort because you get yet more spectacular views of the Mont Blanc Massif on the other side of the valley. And you'll have these views for the next couple of hours as you wander along the high ground to Maisonville, which is another refuge which does excellent food. I can recommend the pasta carbonara, it's very good. So from there, you've got another choice. You can go kind of left towards Refugio Montebianco, but I don't really see much point going that way. You end up on the road most of the way. So the best way is to drop down past all the ski installations to Courmayeur. And Courmayeur is the kind of twin town, if you like, of Chamonix. So Chamonix is the kind of mountain hub on the French side, and Courmayeur is the equivalent on the Italian side. So if you have time, it's maybe a good idea to take a rest there, maybe take a day off, have a wander around the streets, sit in the street cafes, having a beer or a coffee. That's a nice place to hang out. But continuing on, again, there's another choice. There's actually 3 choices of route from Courmayeur. You can take the Val Sapine route, which is quite gentle through the woods. You can take the Mont de la Saxe route, which follows the ridge line and has the best views over the Mont Blanc Massif. Or you can go up to the start of that ridge and then follow the kind of balcony trail to Rifugio Bonatti. My favourite route is along Mont de la Saxe. It's the toughest route, but you're high up on the ridge and you get these wonderful views. So that's the way I choose to go. My second choice would be the balcony route, because you still get good views there and you don't have to do quite so much ascent. And then the route through Val Sapine is very nice, through meadows and forests, but you don't get the views that way. So whichever way you choose, you eventually end up at Col Sapin, or Sapin, Col Sapin, I think. And the path kind of contours around this bowl of loose rock and scree. And then it goes over another pass. It's quite a lot of ascent this day, up and down. And you drop down to Rifugio Bonatti, named after a famous climber. So that's another good place to stay with great food. But if you can't stay there, if it's booked up, you can follow the path down into the valley, and there is a bus. It takes you back to Courmayeur, but check the bus times because it doesn't run all the time, just in summer really. And there's a couple of campsites along the valley there on the way back to Courmayeur, so you could get off there if you're camping, or get a hotel in Courmayeur, and then get the bus back the next day, head back up to Bonatti, and then the trail drops down to the Chalet Val Ferret. You could stay there. I've never stayed there. I think it's quite expensive. But continuing on from there, there's another Rifugio Elena, which is just below the Grand Col Ferret. So you could stay there before doing the next big ascent, or if you've already stayed at Bonatti, it's probably a good idea to keep going because you'll have plenty of time to get over the next pass. And the next pass takes you into Switzerland. So we go over the Grand Col Ferret, which can be very windy up there. So make sure you've got your jacket ready. And then dropping down the other side into Switzerland, you get to the Alpage la Poula. I think that's right, Alpage la Poula, which is a kind of working farm, and they have accommodation and food. I had some very nice fried eggs there, so that's a good spot. There's usually lots of cows roaming around with their bells ringing, and from there it's pretty easy going. Just drop down through the meadows and the forest into the valley, and you reach La Fouly. And at La Fouly there is a huge campsite which I've stayed at a couple of times. It's very good. It's massive, but there's plenty of space, so you should get a pitch there. So if you're not camping, there are places to stay in the village in La Fouly. There's a couple of hotels, an auberge, and there's a very good restaurant that does some nice local dishes and pizzas. Like the next stage is probably the easiest of the lot. You're just walking gently down the valley through a few villages. There's a little kind of pop-up cabin that does snacks and light lunches and things, which I stopped at last time, and I can recommend. I'm trying to find the name of it. Yeah, it was called La Cabana. It's just before Prat de Fort, and it does these really nice kind of crepe things. Very, very tasty. So you just wander down the valley here through more meadows and lots of cows with their bells dinging away. All very Swiss. You do have to do one more little ascent. Well, I say little, it's still quite a bit. Eventually you pop out of the woods at Champex, which is it's a pretty little village on a lake. It's quite upmarket tourist village, so there are some pricey hotels there, and there's a supermarket if you need to top up on anything. I just camped there. There's a good campsite at the end of the village. From Champex you have a choice of route. You can either go the relatively easy way via Alpes Bovines, or you can go over the Fenêtre d'Arpet at 2,665 meters, which is the highest pass on the whole Tour du Mont Blanc. So if you go that way, make sure the weather's okay, make sure the forecast is good, because you don't want to get stuck up there in a thunderstorm. Not a good place to be in that kind of weather. So I've been both ways. They're both beautiful actually. If you like high mountain views, then obviously the Fenêtre d'Arpet is the way to go, but it's a lot more strenuous, a lot more ascent. But out Bovines you get some fantastic views down the Valais region of Switzerland, At Outbovine there is a little farm that sells food and drink. I had a very tasty omelette there with a view to die for. So that's a great place for lunch. Continuing on from there, it's kind of gradually downhill, mostly through forest, but you still get some nice views down the valley. And eventually you come to Col de la Forclaz, where there is a very big hotel, very old hotel that's sat there for a long time. You could stay there. I think it's a little bit pricey, but they also have a campsite around the back, a very simple campsite. But if you're not staying there, it's not far down to Le Peuty, where there is a refuge and free camping on the village green, which is very generous of them. From Le Peuty, you've got another knee-crunching ascent. It's very steep and relentless. It's probably about 600 meters of ascent at least, I think. And there is a choice of routes here. The most obvious way is to go the direct way up this steep zigzaggy path through the woods, but there is an alternative. If you've come the Fenêtre d'Arpet way, it might be worth going this alternative way via Refuge Les Grands. There is a refuge about halfway up the mountain there, so you could go that way. But both routes pop out at Refuge de Balme on the Col de Balme, which is on the Swiss-French border. So that's another big refuge, and you can stay there, have dinner, and from Col de Balme you're heading towards the Col de Montets, which is much lower down. It's about 600 meters down the other side. Again, choice of routes. The main route is over the Aiguillette des Possettes, which is this ridge at the head of the valley, the Chamonix Valley. If the weather's good, definitely go that way, because the views are wonderful in all directions. You get a magnificent view down the Chamonix Valley of Mont Blanc and to the north as well into Switzerland. And it's a beautiful ridge with lots of alpenrose and little rocky knolls and things. So when you get to the end of that ridge, it drops down steeply through the woods to Col de Montets. The alternative is to just drop down in this valley past all these ski installations, which isn't very pretty at all. I wouldn't go that way unless the weather's bad. Yeah, if the weather's bad, you want to stay off the ridges and just drop down through this little valley. Now this final stage is about 16-17 miles, so it's worth breaking it into 2 days, particularly because it's a beautiful section, possibly the most beautiful part of the whole of the Tour du Mont Blanc, so you don't want to rush it. There's 3 places you can stay to split it into 2. Chalet de Lac Blanc, the Refuge La Flagère, and Refuge de Belle La Chatte. Of those 3, I think the nicest one is probably Refuge de Belle La Chatte. It's a little bit smaller and more peaceful. Refuge La Flagère is basically by a big ski place, and there's lots of day trippers coming up on the cable car, and so it's quite busy there and not particularly pretty. Chalet de Lac Blanc is in a very beautiful spot, but it's also very popular. When I was there in June, there were so many people there. It must have been about 200 people wandering around, so that is pretty busy. But it is really magnificent. The reason it's so busy is because it's such a well-known beauty spot. So the start of this section from Col de Montets has 2 options again. You can either go from Tré-le-Champ up via the ladder route. So they have these ladders bolted into the rock, like a via ferrata. Now if you don't have a head for heights, I wouldn't go that way. I would go up to Col de Montets, where there's a little visitor centre for the nature reserve, and from there there's a path that goes up to Tête au Vent, which doesn't have any ladders. And then from there, from Tête au Vent, you have a choice of going up to Chalet de Lac Blanc at Lac Blanc, or there's a kind of bypass path that goes to Refuge La Flagère. And if you go to Lac Blanc, there's another path goes down to Refuge La Flagère. So from Refuge La Flagère, where there's a cable car, you can get a cable car down into the Chamonix Valley if you need to. You just follow the path. It's very straightforward, easy path to follow, a little bit rough in places. and you reach Plainpraz, which is another ski place. And from Plainpraz, there's more ascent to do up to Le Brevant, which is this mountain overlooking the valley. It's very high up, 2,526 meters. Another good place for ibex, so look out for them, and alpine choughs. Saw quite a few of those around there. And it's very rocky. You're up in high mountain country here, so there's often snow in the gullies. It can be a little bit tricky finding your way up here sometimes. They do have some orange paint marks on the rocks to guide you. Just before the summit of Le Brevant, there is another short steep section with ladders bolted into the rock. So if you don't have a head for heights, well, take a deep breath and go for it. Just hold on tight and go slow and steady and you'll get to the top. At the summit of Le Brevant, there is a cable car station where you can get a lift down to the Chamonix Valley if you've had enough of walking. But there's not much further to go, you might as well keep going. There's also a little museum up there. It tells you about the wildlife of the area and the nature reserve. Every time I've gone there it's been closed, but you might get lucky. Descending from the summit, there's a lovely trail, crosses the high mountains where you might see ibex again. I saw some there on my last trip. And eventually you get down to Refuge de Bellachat. Last time I was there, I made the mistake of having a glass of red wine, forgetting I still had to descend many hundreds of meters to the valley floor. So yeah, it kind of went to my head a bit, and I recommend having a non-alcoholic drink if you stop there. And the last bit down to Les Houches, it goes on and on. I mean, it's a lovely woodland, but it's quite steep. So you're zigzagging down and your knees are crying out for mercy. But you do eventually reach Les Houches, where there are places to stay, places to eat and drink. There's a campsite at Bellevue just down the road. You can get a bus there. And that's the Tour du Mont Blanc. It's the most popular trail in Europe, for good reason. Yeah, it's a magnificent trail. It is a bit busy. If you like to have the trail to yourself, you'll be disappointed. But on the plus side, you tend to meet the same people each day at the refuges in the evening and on the trail, which can be good or bad depending on how you're feeling. But yeah, I met some really nice people on the Tour du Mont Blanc. I've made another video with some tips and ideas on how to plan the trip, where to stay, things to look out for, things to be worried about or not worried about. So yeah, you can check that one out as well. Okay, thanks for watching.